have a guy, I'm going to shoot a rocket up into space and we're going to recycle that rocket and land it on the barge in the middle of the Indian Ocean. If we can do stuff like that, we can surely solve this issue of people not moving and this issue of chronic disease. And I've spent most of my career on the high performance side. But I think around 2014, a mom came to me and said, there's something wrong with my kid. He's having difficulty running. What struck me was his basic foundational movement patterns were non-existent. It was so dysfunctional that one of my colleagues mentioned that he probably has some sort of profound neurological disorder. But in reality, the guy had nothing wrong with him. He just didn't grow up in an environment that was conducive to the natural development of his body. So it left him with the inability to play and move and within his peer group. And I'd been seeing this early on in my athlete, even my high performers. And some of these issues stemmed from being young and not moving or playing or being free as a kid and exploring and being too structured and too repetitive in the type of activities. John Kessel, the director of athlete development for U.S. Volleyball for 35 years. He said, my ultimate goal as a coach over 35 years of this whole thing that I've done was never to be a kid's last coach. I mean, that gets me slightly emotional when I talk about that. My ultimate goal as a coach over 35 years of this whole thing that I've done was never to be a kid's last coach. I mean, that gets me slightly emotional when I talk about that. And the lesson of that is really simple. Sport, youth has little to do with anything related to X's and O's, and it has everything to do with this idea of movement for life, right? And never being the reason for this kid not to be moving. Number one is movement does not equal exercise. And from a developmental standpoint, what kid loves a planned, structured, and repetitive activity? No kid. And so if you come back to never be a kid's last coach, you better never do something that's overly planned, overly structured, and overly repetitive. Now let's look at movement. Movement is such that like play, fun, exploration. And so we wonder why kids drop out of sport at 13. We wonder why, there's less than 50% of kids playing sport in high school because there's just not a place for them to do that. Now at DashLX is we have a saying, the more you know someone, the better you can take care of them. And so our company empowers that connection, communication, and caretaking. I'm very, very proud of that. I've often said, whatever happens with my company, then I'm going to invest in your company. And so now I'm saying this publicly because I believe in this idea that you've created called Cool Play.
Before we start, thank you for all the DMs and great feedback on Cool Conversations, which I love to hear, so keep it coming. And what would help us even more is if you choose to subscribe. It helps me to bring you more amazing guests and cool conversations. Now let's dive into the episode. Welcome to Cool Conversations. And today I'm thrilled to have Dr. Jeff Moreno on the show. A doctor of physical therapy, sports scientist, and a board-certified orthopedic clinical specialist, Jeff is also the co-founder and director of human performance at DashLX, a cutting-edge biometrics analysis app. And his dedication to understanding athletic development and movement acquisition is truly inspiring as he empowers individuals to embrace a lifelong journey of movement. But beyond these credentials, I've come to know Jeff as an incredible human being, a passionate advocate for long-term development, the importance of free play, and a love of the outdoors. And so I'm incredibly fortunate to call him both a friend and a mentor. Jeff, I am so excited to have this conversation with you today.
I'm super excited as well. I mean, we've had so many chats outside of this realm, whether in person or virtually, and yeah, I mean, we just love to talk about movement and kids moving and moving for life. And it's finally good to just chat together, I guess, in an open forum, so to speak. So, yeah, I'll try not to say something too controversial, or get your podcast in trouble in any way, shape, or form. I promise.
No, it's, you know what, I think what's so exciting about it for me is that, we've had rich, in-depth conversations, and I want to bring those to light for everyone to hear because you've some fascinating insights. And like you said, we're both so passionate about movement and have spent and dedicated our professional lives to that. And I'd really like to just start there. I know something happened that changed everything for you about youth movement, and even your professional approach. And I'd love if you could take us back to that moment that was pivotal for you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things, and I'll point to two real things. And but I guess first, like I always tell people, I'm a confused physio and sports science guy. I've spent most of my career on the high performance side, primarily track and field, and a smattering of other activities, and I love that. It's my passion. But I think around 2014, a mom came to me and said, "Hey, I'd love for you to see my kid. There's something wrong with my kid. He's in junior high. He's having difficulty running." And me being the running guy, and I was like, I don't, okay, I guess. And this kid came to me, and what struck me is he was just profoundly dysfunctional, and not only movement but also in mind. Right, his communication ability was very poor. His basic foundational movement patterns were non-existent. The guy was kind of just um, and I'll call him Ian. Ian was just like a bone and tissue. um, and so it was so dysfunctional that I asked one of my colleagues, "Hey, what do you think is going on? What do you think his diagnosis is?" And one of my colleagues mentioned that he probably has some sort of profound neurological disorder. But in reality, the guy had nothing wrong with him. He just didn't grow up in an environment that was conducive to the natural development of his mind and his body, right? And so it left him with the inability to play and move and within his peer group, which left him the inability to socialize, which resulted in depression and anxiety and bullying and etc. And so this experience that I went on with this kid, for probably about 6 months, was profound for me. And I'd been seeing this early on in my athletes, even my high performers, that a lot of what they were dealing with wasn't because of what was going on currently, but the past, right? And so they just happened to be talented, and they are able to run fast or jump high or do whatever they do at a very high level, but they still have some issues, and some of these issues stemmed from being young, and not moving or playing or being free as a kid and exploring, and being too structured and too repetitive in the type of activities that they were doing. So this kid ended up doing extremely well, and just falling in love with movement again. But that one experience, the first experience, really changed how I looked at my job as a physio. And it really created a very much a lot of frustration in the physio or healthcare world within the United States. We're very reactive versus proactive in how we take care of humans, and I wanted to work more proactively in people's lives, whether they were my athletes or my high performers or anybody for that matter. So that one thing was is pretty special. And that led to me going on this kind of like sabbatical, I guess, so to speak, and trying to figure out, well, how do I get outside the confines of four walls and really deeply understand someone better so I can take care of them better when they're not with me, in what I call their lived experience. And so that led to meeting a guy who's a data science guy, which led to connecting to wearable devices, which led to creating a company which was initially called Move to Thrive, that went to Power Lab, and it's now DashLX. DashLX is we have a saying: the more you know someone, the better you can take care of them. And we do that knowing someone by collecting a lot of the data that they exhaust every day, on every device that they would naturally use, whether that's a wrist-worn GPS device or the phone in their pocket. And we connect that information with their permission to active brands. So active brands could be the ones or the influence to take care of them better, to personalize products, experiences, and services that matter. Ultimately, what I care about is not the brand selling a shoe more, but I believe, and I believe truly, that brands can be the ultimate influence. They have such influential power over their consumers, and if they can use that influence for good and data for good to inspire, motivate, and educate people to continue a life of movement or become more active, I think it not only helps the brands from a monetary standpoint, but more importantly, those brands become the caretaker that every human wants. We all want to just be taken care of, right? And so our company empowers that connection, communication, and caretaking. And I'm very proud of that. You had a guest on, Emma Ziebler, who's the CEO of the World Federation of Sporting Goods Industries. And I really, that guest and your chat with her really resonated with me because I think it's really simple. Active people need active products. And so less active people need less active products. And so if companies and their KPIs or metrics are concerned around customer lifetime value and number of purchases per year, let's say a running shoe, etc. Well, let's not try to just be transactional and shove product down them. Let's work on the space in between that creates that, right? Which is, let's motivate them to step outside one more day a week for 15 minutes. Let's congratulate them immensely when they do that, and let's provide tools in order to continue to influence that. And the product of that is higher customer lifetime value, but that's not, the thing that we look at. That's not the daily KPI or the data point that we're interested in. For these active brands or running and outdoor brands, the absolute greatest KPI they can have is activity or movement, what I call movement hours, a metric of your consumers move this much um, um, in this Q1 through Q4. I guarantee that's going to correlate to potential products sold. Like it almost has to be, right? If I'm treating an athlete, I'm not going to be interested in them just concerned with winning a gold medal. I'm going to be interested in the process that gets them to that gold medal, in the process for brands to meet their revenue goals, which I'm not interested in. But what I am interested in is the process, the individual, the human, and that human getting outside, being active, enjoying a life of living through movement, right? Which benefits not only our body, but as we well know, our mind. That's really important to me.
We are starting to see, like you said, the sports industry coming together to say, hey, physical inactivity is a problem for us. And and it matters that people are active. And so, if you can dive a little bit further into brands in this process of getting people active, and that can be as kids, it can be adults, and why they should invest in that process. But more specifically, maybe we start with why are they not doing so?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few reasons why potentially they're not. When you're in a business, and a lot of times, things things are moving at a very fast pace, right? And it's hard to slow down a little bit and be reflective and look at the big picture and be patient and invest in the long game, right? There's quarterly earning reports that need to come out, and so we forget sometimes that, like, man, maybe it isn't about chasing revenue, but the maybe it's about kind of the things before that create that, or put that can actualize kind of those goals. And there's something interesting really occurring in these brands, and I from Adidas to Lululemon to On Running to you name it. Like, my chats with them, there's one common denominator, and that one common denominator is we've done a really bad job at understanding our consumer, and we're doing a really bad job at taking care of them. And if we could figure out how to take care of them better, I believe, like, all this other stuff that we were about would probably kind of take care of itself. And so there is this undertone within the doers of the company, where they're like, man, we're missing the boat here. Like, there's so much more that we can do besides just making a great product. Like, how do we get to these individuals, understand who they are, what they're doing, where they live, and how they live life, and then just provide them with experiences in a personal way, or tools or product that allows them to do what they do, which is hopefully get outside and live a life of movement, and health. Now, actualizing that, and so how do you use tech and data for good, right? And you just had a wonderful guest on with regards to her experiences with social media and Facebook, and it isn't going away. But how do we understand the positives and negatives of these tools, and use that information in a way that can be beneficial, um, um, for the individual in a positive way, whether that's for their mental health and well-being, or directly related to motivating people to step outside and be more active, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think um, um, creating language, or communicating, or bringing people together to execute those ideas, it's totally possible. And I always say this, it drives me insane. You have a guy, and he just did something crazy again. Well, the first guy, he said, I'm going to shoot a rocket up in the air and land it on a barge in the middle of the ocean, and he did that. I'm like, how insane is that? Right? Like, if I had a pitch deck and went into a bunch of investors and said, hey, um, I'm going to shoot a rocket up into space, and we're going to recycle that rocket and land it on the barge in the middle of the Indian Ocean, um, they would have been like, you're crazy. No way. Sorry, I'm not giving you money. And then this guy does it again, and he shoots a rocket up in the air, and then he has this thing that grabs it, and pinches it out in the middle of the air. And I'm like, dude, if we can do stuff like that, if people can come together and use data, understand physics and science and math, and and shoot a rocket up in the air in space and land it on a barge, we can surely solve this issue of people not moving and this issue of chronic disease and et cetera, et cetera. Like it drives me insane that this is still an issue. And I get why potentially it is, but it's solvable. It's totally solvable. We have smart people in this world doing smart things, and if you take that creativity and place it in a direction to solve really hard problems, we can solve those problems.
And if we look at, the process of taking care of the customer, and if we look at the sports brands and how they take care of the customer, are you seeing it that there is a shift in the need to actually support their customer's journey in leading a more active lifestyle today than ever before, and in supporting that journey and their lived experience of being more active that ultimately benefits the brand?
Yeah, totally. Like you, historically, that like there's never been a tech or the ability to understand or meet the customer where they're at, right? So most of the communication is unidirectional. It's like I'm going to throw information out there and hopefully it sticks somewhere. But if you create an environment where you're able to meet them where they are because you understand them better based on the life that they're living currently, and then you give them the opportunity to bi-directionally communicate, there becomes this really interesting, more intimate relationship, which then ultimately leads to trust. And then if you have trust as a brand, it's really it's like the holy grail, right? And that trust is massively important as it relates to brand and customer lifetime value and all the metrics that they care about. But how do you do that? Well, you do that by creating a more personal relationship. It takes a lot of tech and it takes a lot of work on the back end to do that. But that's where it should go, and it needs to go that way. And we totally have the ability to do that.
You've talked about how the customers are changing and the needs are changing, and you've seen it, 10 years ago, and it's accelerating. And
Mhm.
if we were to look perhaps, at the younger side of the customer map, which is the kids, and so
Mhm.
we're talking about Gen Alphas and even into Gen Zs, one of the key gaps that I saw coming from, with athletes in elite sport around movement to working with these elementary school kids is their ability or lack thereof of acquiring these movement skills.
Yeah,
Their movement bank that we talk about is
yeah.
deficient. And it was just shocking to see how many kids moved poorly. And, part of our work at Cool Play is, plugging that gap
Mhm.
with of fundamental movement skills. It's part of it. But it's back to your point that I make this quite a bit is Gen Alphas, if we talk about that group under 12s, they're different raw material. And I see the gap that you're talking about because um, unless you're in the trenches and you see it, they're changing rapidly and they have changed rapidly. And there's a disconnect between not even just brands and organizations, but just even, in all sectors with these kids. And
Yeah,
so I know you've witnessed these changes and
yeah,
these shifts.
yeah. And I think, man, there's so much there I want to say, and um, and I'm sure this might get me in trouble, but we're gonna go for it
Go.
anyway.
We're going for it.
I think the second, let me first step back a tiny bit, and then we'll move forward. So if I step back, um, the other most influential thing that happened to me around that same time, which was around 2015, I met a guy by the name of John Kessel, and you should have him on your podcast because I can only imagine how wonderful that discussion would be. John Kessel has was at the time at the Rio Olympics in 2016 is when I chatted with him. And he was at the time the U.S. worked for USA Volleyball, the director of athlete development for USA Volleyball for 35 years. In 2013, though, he was inducted in the Hall of Fame, a Volleyball Hall of Fame, American Volleyball Coaches Association Hall of Fame. And during his Hall of Fame speech, he said two profound things that just completely blew me away. And this guy has been kind of at every level within the sport, right? Like unbelievable mentor, coach, teacher, etc. Coaching education. He said, my volleyball record was 10,522 to 31. And then he paused for a second and he said, 31 is the number of kids that I lost to volleyball because of my coaching. And I was like, boom. That was like massively profound. And then he went on to say that my ultimate goal as a coach over 35 years of this whole thing that I've done was never to be a kid's last coach. And I was like, boom. I'm like, if every decision that was made, whether at a young within a coaching situation or a sporting situation for a young athlete or kid or PE teacher or brand, like is never to lose that kid or never to be that kid's coach, like I guarantee it may change how you approach everything that you do on the pitch, right? Or off the pitch or during PE or whoever you are, related to, connected to movement for kids. And the lesson of that is really simple. Sport, youth has little to do with anything related to X's and O's, and it has everything to do with this idea of movement for life, right? And never being the reason for this kid not to be moving. And so I think there's two important distinctions that need to be made when you're working with kids or you're dealing with kids. Number one is movement does not equal exercise. Okay,
Explain why.
I often say, this is going to get me in trouble probably, that I hate exercise. I absolutely hate exercise, but
I'm with you.
I love movement. And I guarantee your kids hate it too. And if you look up the definition of exercise, and most people haven't, but if you look up the definition of an exercise, it's a type of exercise that is planned, structured, and repetitive. And from a developmental standpoint, what kid loves a planned, structured, and repetitive activity? No kid. And so if you come back to never be a kid's last coach, you better never do something that's overly planned, overly structured, and overly repetitive. Now let's look at movement. Movement is such that play, fun, exploration. It's autonomy. You're giving the kids the opportunity to have choices and make choices. If you want to do this experiment in real life, go to a bunch of kids at a school and ask them if they love to run. They will all say, I hate running. And then 2 minutes later, release them to recess and see what happens. They'll all be running, playing tag, doing things. And you're like, wait a minute, isn't that running? No, it's movement. So it's
Beautiful.
not planned, it's not structured, and it's not repetitive, right? And so like though that was a profound change in how I look at this whole process, right? And so we wonder why kids drop out of sport at 13. We wonder why, like there's less than 50% of kids playing sport in high school because there's just not a place for them to do that. And I've said this to you multiple times, like all sport is made up of movement, but not all movement needs to be sport, right? So back to John, and my own kids from a personal perspective. I was very clear early on that I'd never coach my kids from the sideline. Never. Like I'd never be the dad coach on the sideline, because I was also very clear that my coaching was going to happen 365 days a year in what I call the home pitch. And so, and through example, and, and hopefully, hopefully this turned out. I have wonderful kids who love to move, and climb and surf, and you know, they don't think of it as exercise. They just think of it as something fun, and it wasn't going to be about sport. If it happened to be, fine,
Okay.
but that wasn't the purpose.
And how did you do that? Because when we talk about movement, and I'm thinking of, so many families out there who equate, will say, movement with, or just their kids being active, let's say, with youth sport. So I'm really curious with your own kids and your own experience, how you were able to create, or how you view youth sports in that landscape as an avenue to develop movement.
We've talked about this a lot. My love and hate for sport. So, and because youth sport becomes overly planned, structured, and repetitive, right? And this happened with my kids, where at some point during the season they say like, I don't really want to go to practice. Like, I mean, if a kid's moving and having fun, like who wouldn't want to go to practice, right? But practice becomes exercise. It becomes the timed mile in PE, where there's a consequence, and it's no longer fun, and it's too planned and repetitive, right? I have a difficulty with youth sport and how youth sport is, I guess, executed nowadays. So that's why it was really important for me not to be that coach, but to be the coach at home, which is I'm going to set an example, and my wife's going to set an example. And whether that's going for a walk on the beach, or going for a surf with my kids, or riding skateboards, or um, I'm going to be the one to help facilitate that love for movement and exploration and being outside, and etc. And so I think it starts at home, what I call the home pitch, and I realize that it's, sometimes that isn't always the case, but I think that responsibility is really important, as an example. A funny story, I think one story was, how kids, the teacher asks, hey, what does your parents do for a living, like thing, you know and I think one of my kids, my daughter at the time, said, well, my dad just goes outside and runs every day. But I love that. I was like, you know what, like I also take care of people. I'm a physio, but but I've created this like thing, right? And like how, she can see me as something that, hey, he loves to move, he loves to go to the forest, and or he loves to go for a surf. And I think whether it's a brand being an influencer, then the most important influencer is the influencer at home, right? Or directly related to, or their peer group, right? And so um those things were very important to me. And if they happen to play sport, great. If they happen not, fine. But there but but there's no excuse not to be moving. Kind of like one of your previous guests, I think, Kelly Starrett's wife. Like
Juliet.
there's not an excuse not to move. Like, sorry, you can be lazy and watch TV, but this family, we're gonna be active in some way, shape, or form. So
Love that. What strikes me about that is the joy of movement. And I talk about this a lot because I see it in my work at the kids, even as young as 4, 5, 6. There isn't a joy to moving. They have like that experience that they have had, or their prior experience that we might look at training history in the elite world. It's not there, and that's a super young age. And as you talk about it, the home is a huge part of that. And the other place that they spend a lot of time at is at school. And that could be through recess, phys ed, before and after. So somewhere within that, there's not a positive enough experience that they don't even want to do sport. They don't
Yeah.
want to do sport. And so that's out of the equation. And we're talking about like 60% of kids is the official stat. And depending on the sample, that can be much higher from what I'm seeing. So we're seeing kids that are super young age that don't have even the basic fundamental movement skills to execute it, whether that's getting up off the ground, running, jumping. But really importantly, they don't have that joy of movement. In fact, a video game is going to be fun and enjoyable, but they don't have a command of their body or to enjoy it. So it's a negative experience, and that's one of the most striking things that I'm seeing of today's generation.
Mm.
That is hugely concerning to me.
Yeah. And I mean, that's why I'm very excited to see your cool play grow, right? And why it's so very important, is because it takes kind of another perspective, a fresh perspective to this thing called movement and play, right? Which is less about exercise. It's less about the repetitiveness of PE or running a lap or 3 laps in X amount of time, right? And I don't even know what they do in PE anymore, to be honest with you. But it isn't fun, I'll tell you that. Um, so that's why what you're doing is so massively important. And it's not only massively important at that age, but it transcends, you know, throughout the life, right? And so, um, and it can't be like overstated at all, like how important this is. The consequences are profound, right? Like, um, I mean, very profound as it relates to metabolic disorders, right? Um, Cardiovascular disease, your basic chronic diseases that are very deadly over time. Uh, Anxiety, depression. Um, yeah, I like just a life not as well lived, unfortunately, right? And so, and I like I don't want that to be the standard for youth, right? I don't want a 30-year-old or 40-year-old to have some sort of cardiac issue because, you know, this life of lack of physical activity or physical inactivity set like a trajectory for that individual in a direction where they're dealing with metabolic syndrome and then diabetes and or cardiovascular disease or taking certain amount of medication as a result of that. And we all know the cost and the effect of that, and et cetera, et cetera. And so yeah, so like I mean the statistics are shocking. It all comes back to down to kind of the same thing for me. The more you know someone, the better you can take care of them, right? And so like and this world has changed quite a bit, and access to things that pull our attention away from our bodies, um, and moving our bodies to a situation of being more sedentary, and that doesn't have to necessarily be the case. Obviously I own a tech company, and so I'm not going to say get rid of tech because that would that would never work, right? Like, so how do we use tech for good? How do we use data for good? Just like your last guest, as it related to Facebook, how do we come up with unique data points, and understand the situation as such where we can move the needle in a direction where kids and adults and families are learning to fall in love with movement again, right?
And
Um,
what do you think might be those maybe top three metrics that they should be looking at, that this is where we need to be looking at?
yeah. So the number one for me movement minutes per quarter per consumer within a brand. Um, like, man, like I guarantee if you want to sell an extra shoe a year, um, that metric is going to be really important for you, right? And if you have no idea what your consumer's doing, then you better figure it out, and you better create services and experiences and ways to and forms of communication and connection that get them out the door moving more. And so to me, that is probably the most important North Star metric for a brand. Um, and there's companies I think that I'm really impressed with, like ASICS, who's really has done a lot with this mind body. And then it's your company, and I've often said, whatever happens with my company, then I'm going to invest in your company. And so now
Appreciate.
I'm saying this publicly because you can always come back to this and say, "Remember, Jeff, when you said this?" Because I believe in in this idea that you've created called cool play, because it's so important to have something at that stage of life where you're setting someone up to be more successful later on, right? And um, no one would wait to say, "Hey, we're going to wait to high school to start learning how to read." Um, like no one would say that, but yet, we kind of don't do the same when it comes to just these basic foundations of movement and physical literacy. We consider that being different, right? But yet we need a body and we need a mind to do things later on. And so um, um, you know I think connecting all those dots are really important, from youth to adulthood to
Right.
throughout the spectrum of someone's lifespan or health span, right?
That's what I love about your philosophy, and it's a shared philosophy in some ways, but in your own words, movement for life,
Yeah.
and that's a broader concept than maybe what sports encapsulates in and of itself, even though that sports is an avenue. And in many ways, the current situation that we're in, and it's everybody's problem. It's health, it's education, it's sports. It's everybody's problem, and it's nobody's problem. And then sometimes I feel like we fall into that category. But in equally so, I think you've highlighted really well in terms of how the sports ecosystem can really bolster in and let's say in some ways innovate the future of sport. And from that perspective, the visionary that you are, I would love to imagine or get how you imagine what that could look like if we go in the right direction in a number of years from now. What would that look like for you?
Hmm. Wow. I think what we would see is something different, right? And then the family unit, the private sector, right, which is business. And we're going to connect money, and we're going to connect our profit to a higher purpose. And it's good. It's not only good for us, but it's good for everybody. And so I guess from a vision standpoint, that's how I actually see it, is like companies taking a stand, being authentic, um, um, calling a shot, and being okay and taking a risk and saying, "Hey, I believe in this, and we're going to do everything we can to drive this in the right direction." And I often give the example very simply of Patagonia. And so if brands or if school systems or if healthcare systems said, "Hey, like I do see a better world, and I do see a better world for our kids, and it looks like using our body more, and playing, and getting outside and moving and having fun, and maybe that's through sport or not, but we believe in this." And we can not only make money doing this, but we can also move the needle in the right direction that really takes care of the human in front of us and the human that will be here in the future, I guess. And so I really think it's going to take those people taking a stand and having a voice, and not just talking, but putting their putting action behind that. And so if you had influential people and influential brands and systems that said, hey, this is what I believe in. And for the sporting good industry, like, it seems like a no-brainer to me. How do we understand that as a brand, and how do we connect, communicate, and take care of our consumer better? Done. If you did that, I guarantee you would have a consumer for life. Or I guarantee, like, if you were an educational system or a sporting system used Cool Play, you're going to have more tennis players. You're going to have more basketball players. You're going to have healthier people leading an active life, and it's beneficial to all, right? So, okay, I'm off my soapbox now. I'm done.
And what a vision of what's possible, you know? And as you said, if rockets can be launched to space and brought back, it really is that simple in so many ways. And there's a lot of
Yeah,
collective action in that.
yeah, and we just need we need a group of people or a person who understands what it's like to launch a rocket up in the air and land it on a barge, and understands the possibility of that in our space, to be like, why aren't we doing this? This is crazy. This is simple. And I think that's possible. And you're doing that, and hopefully we're moving the needle at the brand level. And, and there's so many other people. John Kessel's been doing this for 35 years. Never be a kid's last coach. I mean, that, like, gets me slightly emotional when I talk about that.
I have hair standing up right now. Yeah.
So,
Incredible.
yeah.
Jeff, where can we point people to? You're doing incredible work with DashLX in the space of adults and data and connecting brands innovatively. So with this lived experience data, so where can people follow you, reach you, find out more?
Probably my LinkedIn page is where I'm most active. I'm not really that much on social media, and you can find me in Nicene Marks, the state park, which is a state park full of redwoods in Santa Cruz, California. So if you ever want to find me, that's where I'll be. Which I'm going to do right now after I get up off this call with you. But that probably LinkedIn, and then we have a website, but my LinkedIn page, and anybody can always connect with me there. And I love to hear what people are up to and what they're doing, and how we can all work together to move the needle, and create a world where people just fall in love with movement more, right? Not because they should or have to, but because it makes you feel good, and why wouldn't you want to do that? So yeah.
On that note, Jeff, it's been such a pleasure, a joy, really. Though we're not moving too much, to have you on Cool Conversations finally. What a fantastic conversation, and I know people get so much value. So I encourage everyone to just follow you, connect with you, and hear your thoughts on LinkedIn. And for myself, I want to thank you for the mentorship, the guidance, the inspiration, and just all of what you've been doing over the years. It's just incredible. So thank you, thank you.
Yeah, well, it's been fun, and I'm very thankful for you, and very thankful for what you're doing, and I can't wait to invest in you at some point.
I'll hold you to that.
All right. Thank you, Claire.